A California golden couple living the high life.
They're always looking at each other with that love in their eyes.
A brutal crime that left everyone baffled.
This isn't the type of community that has a whole lot of violent crimes.
Was it a setup or a conspiracy of greed?
This is a great case for the National Enquirer. It's not a case for a courtroom.
Only 2 people knew what happened, and one was dead and the other was accused of his killing.
Where is the proof? Show me, please, because it's not true.
A real-life film noir with a Hollywood ending to die for. Tonight on Power, Privilege, and Justice.
August 19th, 1990. Tulare County Sheriff's Office gets an urgent call. 2 people have been shot in a bedroom at an upscale lodge in Camp Nelson, California, deep in the Sequoia National Forest.
The name Rudy Manuel was given to me as a shooting victim. There was also another female identified as Bonnie Hood, who was reportedly deceased.
Sheriff's investigators are immediately dispatched to the lodge.
We made our way into the house. There was some emergency personnel still there. Local resident deputy was still there. And then detectives that I met with from our unit.
In the bedroom, a bloody crime scene. Bonnie Hood has been pronounced dead. The other victim, Rudy Manuel, has been rushed to the hospital with a severe gunshot wound to the head.
Bonnie Hood was still lying on the bed. She had apparently suffered gunshot wounds. Also additional blood on the side of the bed and to the floor area where the survivor ended up.
Investigators learn Rudy Manuel is the lodge caretaker. Bonnie Hood, a wealthy woman from Newport Beach, is the owner of the historic and popular resort. Outside the lodge, detectives find their first clue.
There was a shoe track which was located outside of Bonnie Hood's residence where the shooting took place.
Investigators sweep the property for signs of a possible motive.
We first looked at, was it a burglary gone bad? Was the burglar interrupted? Or was he already in the house when the folks came home?
But the scene doesn't support that.
Looking through the house carefully, looking at items that would typically be taken, were not taken. They were still there. So it appeared to us that someone came in to do a shooting and leave.
The sleepy town of Camp Nelson suddenly had a real murder mystery developing. Detectives were sure they had something bigger on their hands than a simple robbery. Someone wanted Bonnie Hood dead.
Detectives begin interviewing lodge employees and the local townspeople.
We started getting various responses about an individual that had been up in town, in Camp Nelson area, somebody from outside the area. And the descriptions were all similar. Basic weight was the same, hair color was the same.
They described him as a middle-aged man with reddish hair and a bandana.
Right away, people remembered that there had been a stranger who had come up there the weekend before and then had come up again. And so there was a lot of curiosity about this stranger.
Some of the folks had, brought up discussion that they had with this individual, and some of the facts were, he mentioned that he was originally from Montana. However, recently in the Fontana, California area.
Hours before the murder, the mystery man was seen drinking at the bar in the lodge.
We do get strangers, and he wasn't obnoxious or anything like that, or out of line in any way. He was just drinking beer. He was by himself, and that's, it's just not that unusual, so I didn't think anything about it.
Looking for fingerprint evidence, detectives collect beer bottles from the night before.
There was a lot of bottles. However, we did collect them all. We sent them off to a Department of Justice lab.
While Rudy Manuel clings to life at the hospital, investigators quickly learn that both victims had their share of enemies. Rudy a member of the Tule River Indian tribe, has a history of trouble.
His name was not new to me or to law enforcement. His name had come up numerous times in the past as being a suspect in thefts along the reservation, on the reservation, and outside the reservation.
In the short time she'd owned the lodge, Bonnie Hood often butted heads with local business interests.
I know she had a problem with the loggers logging the mountain. That was a big deal. She had files on everybody up there because she was being threatened. She wanted to make sure she had the information.
And I think she alienated a lot of people because I didn't think it was any of her business. It didn't go down well, it didn't sit well with people. It was their livelihood.
Detectives learned Bonnie's personal life also ruffled some feathers.
In the subsequent hours to our arrival, there's just an outpouring of information as to the relationship they saw between Bonnie and Rudy.
For 3 years, Bonnie Hood split her time between the lodge and her main residence in the posh seaside enclave of Newport Beach. She spent weekends on the coast with her husband and kids, then climbed back into her Mercedes for the 5-hour drive to Camp Nelson. Back home, friends saw her as a devoted wife and mother. But up north, rumors were rampant.
I could sense that some of the folks were taken back a little bit by her closeness or her relationship that she had established with Rudy Manuel, given his reputation.
There was some bad feelings between the local townspeople and the people from the reservation, so that built up the finger-pointing and the whispering and the gossiping.
With so many enemies, but no clear motive, investigators are stumped. Cracking the case may depend on the only eyewitness, Rudy Manuel, who remains in critical condition.
They didn't know who was the intended victim and who wasn't.
It was a high-profile case. It was a major event for the community. You know, this isn't the type of community that has a whole lot of, violent crimes. It was a whodunit.
A targeted hit in the middle of all that nature and serenity. How ironic. Before it was solved, this story would have more twists and turns than the snaky mountain road to Camp Nelson.
News of Bonnie Hood's murder sends shockwaves through the mountain community of Camp Nelson. Back home in Newport Beach, her family is devastated.
We had a phone call that morning. Minutes later, my dad came in. I'd never seen him cry before. He was just sobbing, like didn't even know what to do.
I had a nightmare that she had been shot, that she was dead. And I remember waking up from that nightmare to hear my dad crying, and to hear my sister crying.
Everyone wonders who could bring terror to the small, tranquil town, and why.
There were a number of theories. It might have been a drug deal. It could have been a robbery. There are all these other sort of normal, usual scenarios that would explain what happened in that bedroom.
First 24 hours, we didn't know what happened. That's the first time in 35 years I've ever locked the house.
I felt like this place that we had seen as an oasis was violated. Suddenly there was this huge gash in the middle of it, and nobody knew what to make of it. Nobody knew what the story was, and of course, everybody had a theory.
Then, detectives get a huge break. Rudy Manuel makes a miraculous recovery. Despite having a bullet lodged in his brain, he remembers everything about the attack and tells detectives he and Bonnie had closed the lodge at around 3 a.m. Shortly thereafter, an armed intruder burst through the bedroom door.
And she said, "Who are you? You know, what do you want?" And he says, "I know you, bitch." And Rudy came after him, and he shot Rudy first, and Rudy was shot right in the middle of his forehead.
The gunman then shot Bonnie once through the temple and disappeared.
I can't imagine what people back in Newport Beach were thinking when they heard that Bonnie was found in her bedroom with the handyman. It was a shocking finale for the Golden Girl from Orange County.
When she walked into a room, she just lighted up. I remember at my mom's funeral, the man who spoke said, "Describing Bonnie Hood is like describing a rainbow to a blind person."
According to family and friends, beautiful Bonnie was always the center of attention. In college at San Jose State, her magnetic personality attracted a fellow freshman named James Newman Hood, the son of a top executive at General Electric. The young Hood was as ambitious in life as he was with women, but Bonnie was different. When Alpha Tau Omega's star swimmer hooked up with Delta Gamma's pretty young pledge sister, sparks flew.
They were clearly in love, and they had a relationship that was obvious to anybody that knew them that was going to continue on.
After college, the couple got off to an adventurous start. Jim took a civilian job in Vietnam, and Bonnie worked as a stewardess on military flights.
Before one of her flights, she got a typhoid immunization shot, and she had an allergic reaction to it. She was paralyzed from the neck down. My dad flew down from Vancouver, and he said, "Bonnie, when you can walk 30 feet, I'm gonna marry you. You gotta walk 30 feet, though." When she could walk 30 feet. She flew up to Canada and visited my dad and said, "You didn't think I hurt you, but I did."
In the late 60s, the couple married and started a family in the exclusive oceanfront community of Newport Beach.
Newport Beach wasn't quite the Newport that it is today. Pack up a picnic and go to Big Corona Beach and have a bonfire. We would go boating, go to Catalina once in a while.
In the 1980s, the Hoods capitalized on Orange County's real estate frenzy, and soon the family was flying high. Bonnie was an instant success in marketing, while Jim developed commercial complexes that quickly made him a millionaire.
He's a tremendous salesman. He has a tremendous personality, and so there was no reason for him not to succeed. She was always a go-getter, and she was just like Jim. I think that's what made them such a great couple, is that they had tremendous synergism together.
Things were taking off. There was an easy air of affluence in the air, and I think there was a sense of camaraderie and a sense of being almost in a gilded age. The weather's beautiful, the boats, the bay, the hills, the large houses. It's an intoxicating existence.
But eventually, Bonnie grew tired of the Tony Newport Beach lifestyle.
Down in Newport, she wasn't happy. The people were a little bit fake, and they were into their PTAs and into their house tours, and my mom didn't want any part of that. She wanted, you know, the peace and quiet of Camp Nelson.
The mountains always held a special place in Bonnie's heart. When she was a child, her father would take the family on summer vacations to Camp Nelson.
My mom grew up camping there, and she decided to share that joy with us by taking us camping there as kids.
When Bonnie learned the lodge had come up for sale, she jumped at the chance for a new career and a new lifestyle.
Kind of started out as a joke, like, yeah, we'll buy Camp Nelson. And then my parents talked, and it turned out to be something that was possible for them, so they made it happen.
In 1987, Bonnie and Jim became the new owners of the Camp Nelson Lodge, an historical stone and timber resort featuring a 10-room hotel, a bar and restaurant, surrounded by 40 acres of lush horse pasture and spectacular scenery. Bonnie had big plans for the rustic resort.
She spent a lot of money, and she fixed the rooms up, and she spent a lot of money fixing the lodge up. I guess the main thing would be that she brought it back to life, and she's the one that put Camp Nelson back on the map.
My mom had always had this dream of having a ranch, and my dad always wanted to help her fulfill that dream. A place where she could have her horses and really have the open space, and the lodge was the key to that.
It was definitely a family effort. We got a tractor. My mom literally drove this refrigerator truck around. My dad had helped repair the roof. We all kind of helped out.
Rather than relocate the family, the Hoods decided to try something new, a commuter marriage. On weekends, she'd shuttle back and forth from the resort to Newport Beach. During the week, she'd help the children with homework by phone and fax.
It wasn't just my mom's up in Camp Nelson now and you know, leaving the kids and the husband at home. It's just not how it was. A weekend that we weren't up there, she would come down. It was always just very normal.
While Bonnie was living out her childhood dream, Jim was taking exotic vacations, trekking through the Amazon and running with the bulls at Pamplona. There were whispers that the marriage was in trouble.
We'd already learned about the relationships between Bonnie and her husband, Jim. That was very strained. They spent a lot of money on the lodge. I recall Jim having financial difficulties with some commercial investments that he had.
The real estate business in Southern California got a little bit rocky, and it wasn't a rising tide lifting all boats.
Investigators speculate that with Jim's business taking a hit, Bonnie's pet project became a source of tension.
Camp Nelson was becoming a money pit. They paid $750,000 for it, and the restoration was costing, I think, more than they had imagined.
Everything was hemorrhaging money, and there wasn't anything to pay it back with.
It seemed the Hood's gilded age had come to an end, and so apparently had their undying devotion.
I think the longer she was up there, the less she felt she had in common with him. And the more adamant she was about what she was doing, and the more he was separated from her, the more he wanted to be doing his own thing. And I think the cracks that might have been there hidden started to become fissures in their relationship.
There was talk of divorce. He was upset with her squandering money on the lodge. And then the relationship she had developed with Rudy. So now we're looking at what is really going on here. Who has a motive to do this?
Digging deeper, they discover Bonnie's insurance totals a cool $3 million.
If she dies of what's perceived as a murder committed by somebody else, he's not going to lose half of his holdings because of a divorce. You know, he's going to be the beneficiary of the life insurance, so his problems are all solved. His problem is gone and the money's coming in.
Financial trouble, a rocky marriage, insurance policies worth millions? You better believe the cops are going straight to the husband. But connecting the dots in this murder mystery would be tougher than anyone ever expected.
Weeks after Bonnie Hood's murder, both Jim Hood and his dead wife become the targets of a media feeding frenzy.
It's so easy for them to speculate after she's gone. The newspapers had slowly taken the word allegedly out of their paragraphs. Suddenly it just became fact.
They say talk of an affair and financial trouble is totally unfounded.
The locals have it. They had it wrong about my mom and about my mom's and Rudy's friendship. And that's all it was a friendship.
My dad, before my mom died, had just bought me a car with cash, and he never had any type of financial issues, so why would he need insurance money? The man sold million-dollar properties on a regular basis and had several of his own in assets. To me, it was ridiculous.
Family and friends claim Bonnie's troubles weren't at home, but up at Camp Nelson. Weeks before her murder, tension with locals had escalated.
She told me that she had been threatened, and her windshield had been broken, and that people were basically threatening her life, and that she had taken her horse into the mountains and found a drug field owned and operated by the people up there.
And she had a lot of information on a lot of things in Camp Nelson in a filing cabinet there that disappeared. No one knows where it went.
Meanwhile, investigators are getting closer to finding the person who entered Bonnie's bedroom that night. The lab results are in on the beer bottles collected from the lodge, and a single fingerprint points to a suspect.
One of the identifications made was a fellow by the name of Bruce Beauchamps, who had a current address out of Fontana, California. And doing further study on him, he also had a prior criminal record out of the state of Montana. So those little bits of information, really encouraged us that we were onto something here.
When detectives question Beauchamp, he admits he visited Camp Nelson 2 weekends in a row for a little R&R. Police find that story hard to swallow.
Bruce Beauchamp was not living well. The area of Fontana where he was living was very substandard. As I remember, it was a trailer home, very unkept. You would not expect someone like that to spend money traveling the distance to Camp Nelson to spend a weekend. It just didn't make sense.
Then, asked about his employment, Bruce Beauchamp reveals some startling news.
We learned from him who his employer was, and that turned out to be Bonnie's husband, James Hood. We thought that was very, very interesting and a little too coincidental.
Suddenly, the picture completely changed because it wasn't a stranger who'd been up there randomly, but it was a stranger who tied them directly to the husband.
Jim Hood was a blue-blooded, blue-blazered country clubber. Bruce Beauchamp was a redneck with a rap sheet. For investigators, connecting this odd couple was their biggest challenge yet.
Back in Camp Nelson, police show Rudy Manuel a photo lineup, and he positively IDs Bruce Beauchamp's photo as the man who shot him. Detectives also find 2 witnesses in nearby Porterville who say Beauchamp was showing off his gun the weekend of the murder. Then, the shoe print found outside the murder scene is matched to a specific brand of sneaker.
And investigators were even able to find receipts where Bruce Beauchamp had purchased and owned a pair of those shoes.
2 months after the shooting, Bruce Beauchamp is charged with murdering Bonnie Hood. But investigators don't think he acted alone.
We felt real comfortable that we were on the right track here. With Mr. Beauchamp working for Mr. Hood, our focus then kind of also zoomed in on Mr. Hood as a possible conspirator in this murder.
For Jim Hood, there was motive galore. There's the financial problems that he was having. There was the money that Bonnie was spending on the camp. There was the insurance on Bonnie's life that would solve his business problems. Then there was the jealousy as a motive. 2 classic motives for murder.
But Hood had his defenders.
There was never any sign that my parents had any trouble in their marriage, ever. And, where is the proof? Show me, please.
I'd bet 2,782% that she never had an affair with anybody. I know Jim never did. As far as financials, I don't think there was a financial issue anywhere. Here's a guy that was building $8 million buildings. He didn't need a $400,000 insurance policy.
As trial approaches, investigators try but fail to break Beauchamp.
He did not implicate his boss in any of this. Even when we arrested him and he was charged, he kept tight-lipped. And our thinking was, we take him to trial for the murder, for the shooting, and after he's convicted, he's going to start asking for a deal prior to sentencing and give up James Hood.
With no evidence linking James Hood to Bruce Beauchamp, the prosecution faces a huge challenge. They must try to convince jurors that the murder was a burglary gone bad.
The real story was not coming out. It wasn't until after we convicted Bruce Beauchamp. And we were biting at the bit for this thing to, culminate and come to an end and find him guilty so we could get on with the case. And we were prepared and ready to do that.
But the theory doesn't hold up in court.
The prosecution's theory of the case for Bruce Beauchamp made no sense without Jim Hood. It wouldn't work. It's too random.
Then other problems begin to surface.
The star witness was Rudy Manuel. You don't pick your cards in these things. You play with what you're dealt. And Rudy Manuel had an extensive criminal record.
If you can paint the victims as somehow unsympathetic, even if it looks like that person committed that crime, if the jurors don't like the victims, they may find reasonable doubt where there is no reasonable doubt.
When the jury returns, they find Bruce Beauchamp not guilty. As he walks from the courtroom, a free man, investigators realize the true story of what happened that night might never come out.
Once Beauchamp was acquitted, I think there was almost no chance that the cops could get Jim Hood.
So it was frustrating, because we were geared up and ready to go to Southern California again, because we knew once Bruce was convicted, he would talk.
Bruce's acquittal appeared to kill any chance investigators had at getting justice for Bonnie. But what goes around comes around, and this case was about to come full circle.
Bruce Beauchamp's acquittal in the murder of Bonnie Hood is a huge blow to investigators.
When you lose one in court, when they're acquitted, and you've got the guy, but the jury comes back with their decision. Those hang with you for a long time.
Jim Hood returns to Newport Beach to raise his children, but the stigma haunts him.
We really ignored the rumors that were in the paper. My dad was amazing at not breaking down, never was in a bad mood, always positive and 100% and more there for us.
I felt it from my friends. I felt it from everywhere around me. All of a sudden, I was a bad guy. I was the criminal just because the paper had said something bad about my dad. But the one place I didn't feel it from was my dad.
The Hood family seemed to be putting the past behind them and moving on with their lives.
911 emergency. Yes, I need to. Is it an emergency, sir? Anyway, I just want to make sure there's nobody else out there.
Just months after Bonnie's murder trial, the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department gets an urgent call from Mission Plaza Shopping Complex, located in Fontana, the office of James Hood.
What's the emergency? Excuse me? They're trying to kill me.
On the floor, dead, his body riddled with bullets and a gun clenched in his hand, is Bruce Beauchamp.
He's down. He's out. He isn't moving. He's what? He's not moving. I shot him. You shot him? Yes.
I'm sitting in the newsroom of the Orange County Register, and I can see my editor, Mike Lednovich, walking over to me. And he said, "You'll never believe what happened." I said, "What happened?" He goes, "There's a murder in Fontana." I said, "Well, who was the victim?" And he goes, "Well, Bruce Beauchamp." And I said, "Who did it?" "Jim Hood." And it was like, Jim Hood, man.
Jim Hood admits he pulled the trigger, but swears it was self-defense. Hood tells detectives he was receiving threatening phone calls from Beauchamp.
And he had told me on a number of occasions he was concerned for his life.
Hood says the two agreed to meet to work out their differences. Just in case, Hood says he kept a gun in his desk for protection. He only started firing when Beauchamp reached for a gun first.
The guy accused of murdering your wife lies dead on your office floor. No matter how you spin it, it just doesn't look good. But Beauchamp's body, as investigators are about to find out, wasn't the only thing full of holes.
If Beauchamp came in with the intention of killing or somehow intimidating Jim Hood, how did he let himself get shot 7 times? He's the thug.
There was a number of things that didn't match up. There was 2 pools of blood and a smear in between, which meant that the body had been moved. This guy who was just riddled with mortal wounds had a gun in his hand. You know, had fallen down, still had a gun in his hand, and that didn't make any sense at all.
2 days later, James Hood is arrested and charged with murder. Everyone familiar with Bonnie's case is stunned.
I remember thinking to myself, here we go. Here's a conclusion of our case.
It was like 2 different stories. One was, here was this crazy man who was acquitted of killing Jim Hood's wife, and now he was going after Jim Hood. And the second narrative was that Jim had hired him to kill his wife. He had gotten away with murder, couldn't be tried again because of double jeopardy, and now was extorting, blackmailing Jim for all he could.
It was extremely frustrating to have the media coverage talk about my dad the way that they did. The way that they painted my dad was he's this rich, white Newport Beach developer who comes up with this shrewd plan to, you know, for conspiracy to murder. And it's just the most absurd thing.
But investigators think otherwise. A friend who drove Beauchamp to Hood's office that day tells detectives Bruce removed a hunting knife from his pocket before he left the car because he didn't want to appear threatening in case Hood called police.
He definitely knew it was not going to be a nice little chit-chat, but I do not think under a million years he thought he was going to get shot.
Then, investigators get the hard evidence they need to close the book on Hood. CSIs can't find any blood spatter on the gun in Beauchamp's hand. The gun had to have been placed there after the shooting, and whoever did it made a terrible blunder.
Bruce was a construction person, hammered with his left hand, you know, shot heroin with his left hand, fired a pistol with his left hand, and the gun was in his right hand.
Bruce was left-handed, and the gun was in his right hand. So, big mistake.
The defense contends Bruce Beauchamp came inside that office and threatened James Hood with a gun. But the prosecution contends Bruce Beauchamp was unarmed, that he was gunned down by James Hood in cold blood in order to silence his knowledge of what really happened to Bonnie Jean Hood.
In October of 1992, the Bruce Beauchamp murder trial begins. The San Bernardino County Courthouse is worlds away from the easy lifestyle of Newport Beach, and Jim Hood is far from your typical defendant.
Jim was cool, tall, blonde, blue-eyed, kind of preppy looking, charming.
I pulled a Saturday shift in the Orange County edition of the Los Angeles Times. So I go to do, Hard Rock Cafe opening story on a Saturday afternoon. Out from the crowd, there's Jim Hood with 2 or 3 friends just chatting and having a good time. If I was on trial for murder, I don't know that I'd be at a Hard Rock Cafe opening on that Saturday.
Still, the courtroom is filled with supporters.
The media had turned him into this monster that there never was, and before asking us who he was, they just jumped to the verdict of, well, if the paper says so, it's the truth.
He tried to put on a demeanor that was one of confidence, but he was petrified. And the thought of going to jail for life, not a very good thought.
Hundreds of miles from the pristine pine forests of Camp Nelson, Jim Hood faced the music. Reporters and cameras lined the walls of the San Bernardino County Courthouse, waiting for the big man to speak.
The rest of the story was bound to come out. What people wondered about, what people suspected about the murder of Bonnie Hood might, as a consequence of this trial, come out. And we might finally find out what happened.
In opening statements, prosecutor David Whitney lays out Jim's financial troubles.
Mr. Hood had his fingers in so many pies that even though he claimed in many instances to be a multimillionaire, in fact, he was in a precarious financial position. And it is our belief that one of the reasons that ultimately he hired Bruce Beauchamp to kill Bonnie was that he was having a serious problem financially and could benefit from insurance policies on her life.
The state believes that after the acquittal in Bonnie's case, Bruce found his golden goose.
Beauchamp starts calling Hood, and in one instance threatens, if you don't start dealing with me properly, I'm going to sink you.
Knowing he could not be tried again for that murder, he tried to get more money out of Jim. And I suspect Jim probably was giving him some money and then just finally realized he had to put an end to this.
What he meant was he was going to expose Jim Hood for his complicity in the murder.
The defense sticks to their theory of self-defense.
He had no reason to kill Bonnie Hood. Let the evidence tell you, let the witnesses show you that all he has here is gossip, rumor, suspicion.
Hood's lawyer argues that the 911 call proves he's not a cold-blooded killer, but a man who feared for his life.
What's the emergency? Excuse me? They're trying to kill me. I shot him. Who just tried to kill you? Bruce Beauchamp, the guy has been trying to kill me.
Bruce Beauchamp was a badass. He looked like he was not someone you would want to have angry at you. He looked dangerous.
Okay, do you want us to send a deputy out to you? Yes, I'm just watching the front door right now to make sure there's nobody else there to come and get me. I locked all the doors. Are you at Mission Plaza? Yes, I am.
For the first time in California history, each side uses animations to illustrate their theory. The state contends Bruce Beauchamp wasn't just shot and killed. He was mowed down with 7 bullets from Hood's 9mm pistol. Then, the state calls a series of witnesses to dispute Jim's claim of self-defense.
Have you ever seen a gun in the hand of a victim on the ground holding a gun in any fashion?
No, I have not.
Is that one of the things that caused you to be suspicious in this case?
That is true.
Specifically, have you ever seen a victim with a gun in that fashion in his hand at a homicide scene?
No.
It was a concrete floor, and somebody is dead weight, they're not going to keep holding on to their gun.
Experts testify that blood spatter on the floor around Beauchamp's hand proves the gun wasn't there when he was shot.
I would have expected blood to have been, or some blood to have been on the gun or the hand, because there were blood stains all around it, and there was no blood stains on the gun. The gun had to come there at a later time.
The forensic evidence is a home run, but the question of motive still remains.
Rich people sometimes get away with things, but He must have known he was taking an enormous risk in shooting Bruce Beauchamp.
Next, the state calls their star witness Sharon Spray, Bruce Beauchamp's widow. She describes a conversation she had with Bruce shortly after the Camp Nelson murder.
I was cleaning our bedroom, and we had a big four-poster waterbed, a king-size waterbed, and I was cleaning back underneath the headboard, and there was an envelope in there, and when I pulled it out, there was $10,000 cash in it. And I asked him what it came from, and at that time, he didn't want to answer me. I asked him if it had anything to do with Bonnie Hood, and he told me yes. And I asked him if he did it, and if he had killed her, and he told me yes.
The state contends the money is only part of the $50,000 fee Hood paid him, but Beauchamp got greedy.
He said, you can't tell anybody about this. You cannot tell anybody about this. But, you know, this is, I got this from Jim, and this is where I can get money from him.
Spray tells the jury how Bruce's last request for money ended with the fatal meeting in Fontana.
I think Bruce had asked him to wire him money, and Bruce told me that Hood told him no, that he had to come back and then they would settle it.
The wife's testimony was damning, but the packaging stunk. I mean, this Sharon Spray was some piece of work. Heroin addict, ex-con, grandmother at 35. Didn't take long for the defense to skewer the prosecution's star witness.
Sharon Spray was a tough, junkie cowgirl. I don't know how else to describe her. She, you know, tattoos and, you know, long-time habit and petty crime.
She didn't come across as very strong witness on the stand, and it was a question of which scenario you wanted to believe.
Then, the defense turns the tables. Sharon can't account for how the money was spent or why the couple struggled with paying bills.
It's total hearsay. The person who told her is dead. I mean, he might have had $10,000 from dealing meth. If she did see the cash, which is unprovable, unverifiable, he might have lied to her about the source of it.
They were trying to say was that he had paid off Beauchamp to kill his wife. Well, there's no evidence of him making withdrawals. There's no evidence of Beauchamp depositing money in a bank account. Where was the money?
Finally, it's Hood's turn at bat.
Jim had a lot of explaining to do. He had to convince the jury that it was actually a shooting in self-defense.
His eyes were looking at me like he's gonna beat the living heck out of me. I was scared to death. I thought, you know, he was gonna kill me.
He says he kept shooting because Beauchamp's arm was still moving. Once it stopped, Hood says he never moved the body or the gun.
People don't understand. Somebody's shooting at you, you just keep pulling the trigger till the thing stops.
Did you do anything to the gun that was in Mr. Beauchamp's right hand?
No.
Did you do anything to Mr. Beauchamp's body other than possibly touch his arm when he was on the ground?
I did not.
The jury had heard it all. Conspiracy, greed, and murder. But was it enough to convict Jim Hood?
Jim came across, you know, as very wealthy Newport, but then in the end, you know, the jury had to decide, you know, who was telling the truth.
After 20 days of deliberations, the jury returns. They're deadlocked 10-1 with the last juror undecided. The judge declares a mistrial. For now, Jim Hood is a free man.
You have to wonder what was going through that one holdout's mind. Who did he think he was? Henry Fonda in 12 Angry Men? Jim Hood had slipped the noose. But the final act of this California drama was yet to play out.
The San Bernardino County DA's office decides to try Jim Hood a second time. Less than a year after his first trial, he walks the gauntlet of courthouse cameras and reporters once again. But this time, the state has learned from its mistakes.
In the second trial, the prosecutor did not seek to prove motive. He didn't want to tie together that Jim had hired Bruce, that Bruce was blackmailing Jim. He just strictly went with the evidence, the forensic evidence.
But when Hood's version of the story changes in his testimony, the prosecutor makes a daring move. He calls jurors from the first trial to testify.
He used the jurors as witnesses to show that Jim had lied. And I think then I was just like ka-chung. You could hear the the nail going in the coffin.
The strategy is a success. This time, the jury returns confident in their verdict, guilty.
That was the one time when he looked like a Mack truck had hit him. I really think he thought he was not going to be found guilty. I think he was absolutely just stunned. And the first thing that he said was, well, I can't. I mean, my car, it's in a short-term parking thing. I mean, he just went woo into a different level of denial.
Investigators in Bonnie's case finally feel some sense of justice.
It exonerated us. You know, it really did. There's no doubt in my mind at all that Bruce Beauchamp was the person responsible for Bonnie's death and shooting Rudy, and he was subsequently killed by James Hood. So, case is closed.
But for Jim's family and friends, the verdict is a travesty.
Jim Hood lost everything. And this was a man just a few weeks before the trial ended, had gone out boating in Newport Harbor.
He was an easy target because he was a wealthy, successful, handsome, charming man from Newport Beach that had everything going for him. I think the attorneys look at it as kind of their big fish, their bonfire of the vanities.
To have someone like Bruce Beauchamp, he's a man who's had many convictions, been in and out of prison. He gets the benefit of the doubt, and someone like my dad who has no criminal history and who's an amazing father, an amazing husband and person in the community. It doesn't make any sense.
Whether he ordered Bonnie's death or not, I don't know. But there are two dead people, somebody spending a lot of time in jail. In this case, it was a story about a culture as well as about a crime, that affluence is not a cure for everything, that money can't buy you love.
Jim Hood's request to serve his sentence at a medium security facility was denied. Instead, he's doing his time at one of California's roughest and most isolated state prisons. Officially, his wife's murder remains unsolved. For Court TV, I'm Dominic Dunn.